Chapter 13, Stepping Off the Edge to the Future. Quote, computers are useless. They can only give you answers, unquote. Pablo Picasso. We've traversed a lot of territory regarding the risks facing supply chains, the roles that intelligence tools and people play in securing and optimizing supply chains, and why a new approach to digital is crucial. Yet when it comes to knowing what's next and what will most disrupt future supply chains, we're all still reading the tea leaves. However, our ability to be ready for the change is paramount, even as we're determining what that change will be. Attack of the machines. I've established the layering roles of intelligence tools and people, but in this era of AI, what happens when the machines learn how to attack? I've argued so far that we need to start operating like hackers, which means constantly trying to find vulnerabilities in our supply chains. We need to attempt to break them, fix them, and run this exercise over and over again. But that is labor and capital intensive. What if I could instead teach a machine to look for vulnerabilities repeatedly and endlessly? This is not science fiction. For the past few years, China has held a number of robot hacking games where contestants bring AI/ML tools to work autonomously or in hybrid partnership with humans to attack systems. There have been human versions of these contests for years. The emergence of machine-against-machine contests is truly staggering and ups the ante. To let a machine autonomously run testing on known vulnerabilities and then predict and learn new vulnerabilities is scary. If ChatGPT can code an application, then it can be used to scan an application to find its vulnerabilities. This is truly a hacking force multiplier. Every time we talk about the impact of machine learning, we have to understand how it can be hacked. The term is known as model inversion. Hackers can reverse engineer algorithms to get the system to expose the underlying training data. With the underlying data exposed, our nefarious characters can then exploit the algorithms for their own gains. This is using the machine learning system as intended, but for unintended purposes. Before we panic, these same tools and approaches can be used to secure systems. My question is, are you ready? Are your supply chain systems up to the task? More importantly, are you ready for the ensuing chaos this will bring? Pandemic risk management lessons. Historians, scholars, and political leaders, we hope, will spend the next century studying the causes, responses, and lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. Never has a global society had so many means and resources to identify, prepare, prevent, contain, and eliminate disease, and yet failed so spectacularly. The lack of adequate personal protection equipment, ventilators, data collection, testing capabilities, or consistent prevention methods led to a global tragedy. The fact that pharmaceutical companies and scientists developed a vaccine in such a short time is a testament to the triumph of the human spirit. As we move from pandemic to endemic, there are some very uncomfortable questions. Leaving out the political aspects of the COVID-19 discussion, masking, vaccine mandates, government authority, vaccine equality, and so on, and without getting into a broader critique of public health, there are a few practical areas of the pandemic response that should sound familiar to every supply chain practitioner. Pulitzer Prize winner and staff writer at The Atlantic, Ed Yong, points out multiple issues. We have built a society that is intensely vulnerable to health crises. Public health data is difficult to collect, process, and analyze, and very little effort is put into disease prevention and control. I could write the same statement about today's supply chains, and it would nearly be identical. We have built a supply chain that is intensely vulnerable to disruptions. Supply chain data is difficult to collect, process, and analyze, and very little effort is put into prevention and control. In fact, that is a central thesis of this book. We have to get much better at collecting third-party data and turning it into intelligence that we can use to feed digital tools that make supply chain practitioners more effective and supply chains more secure. Young also suggests that we need to get better at designing our society to be more tolerant to health crises. For example, making high-quality ventilation for buildings, improving testing frequency and collection, and upgrading hospitals. Or more succinctly, he points out that he can pull out his phone and it'll tell him whether it'll rain in a micro location. So why can't we know whether there's a spike in an infectious disease or other public health consideration in the same place? Of course, it requires integrating many proprietary legacy systems across government agencies and even countries. Plus, we would need to add vastly more data collection and distribution capabilities so that we can ingest the data and deliver it in a timely fashion. A gigantic data governance headache. If this sounds familiar, it's exactly what we need to do to build the next generation supply chain. Ethics notwithstanding, the only difference is that there is neither the political will nor money to do this for public health. However, there's plenty of money and will to do this for global supply chains. Ultimately, we had several opportunities to stop the pandemic, but that would have required pulling out all the stops, something that was politically, culturally, and socially impossible. Similarly, when it comes to threats to our supply chains, an unwillingness to share information with your third parties and other industries keeps everyone equally at risk. One company's unwillingness or inability to secure their industrial control systems, stop accepting emailed invoices, or not let others know when they've been breached keeps the exploits in circulation. One infected device will continually look for other vulnerable devices in which to spread its virus. You may be secure today, but if you slip, then that virus, malware, ransomware from the infected device will attack. These attacks target systems that do not use logic. These programs are binary, so collectively we need to design and patch our systems to ensure that devices can't be infected and that the viruses simply fade into the ethereal dustbin. The next disruption. As a futurist, the question people most often ask me is, what is the next big disruption? It's a hard question for anyone to answer, and nobody can truly know the future with any certainty. At least I can't. Will it be another pandemic? Possibly. Will it be a huge cyber attack? Probably. Will it be a nuclear war? Hopefully not. These disruptions and the countless others that occupy the daily news cycles are what we know. What I like to look at is the slow-moving, seemingly micro-impact trends that are occurring and what they mean more broadly. The lying flat phenomenon in China is noteworthy, but hardly a cause for alarm. Same thing for the work-from-home trend. In the U.S., we have the student loan debt crisis, gun violence, social inequality, and environmental destruction. In this context, perhaps the next greatest disruption is confronting the limits of a capitalistic global society. I think one of the greatest future supply chain disruptions might be a recalibration of capitalism, or at least parts of it. I know I'm about to lose 75% of readers, but don't go just yet. This is not a liberal treatise on why capitalism is deleterious or an advocation for some other system, socialism, imperialism, monarchy, oligarchy, or religious state. It's merely to point out if we're going to imagine and design tomorrow's supply chain, we have to take a critical look at the underlying political and social systems upon which our supply chains will operate. During the pandemic lockdown, people survived with less. We took up gardening, bread making, household repairs, and other such activities when supply of goods was low and free time was aplenty. The breakneck pace of consumption that the global economy is based upon has side effects, whether human or environmental. As supply chain designers and managers, it's incumbent upon us to ask if there's a future whereby consumption drops precipitously due to societal factors. Everybody in leadership today is making decisions for the next generation without the benefit of knowing how society will evolve, just as leaders in the late 1990s and early 2000s did when they moved operations across the globe in pursuit of the lowest cost. I'm not judging those decisions, just pointing out that we have a choice to make, and we will be judged in the future decades. As supply chain designers, we assume that capitalism and technological progress are inevitable. But are they? The underlying premise of today's supply chain designs assumes ever-increasing levels of consumption. Accordingly, job one is to get any product to any place in the world within a matter of hours as cheaply as possible. We have proven we can do that, but it's not clear whether our global societies will be able to sustain this. What happens when we don't go rushing out for the next great consumer digital device? What happens when people decide that microplastics or chemicals entering our body through nonstick cookware is not what we want? What if one of the lessons from the pandemic is that we need to move from toilet paper to bidets? What if we move from highly consumable products like fast fashion, which have a heavier dependence on supply chains running without disruption, to more precise, long-lasting products? I'm not advocating any of this, but merely pointing out that these trends would affect tomorrow's supply chains. Otherwise, we're simply setting our new supply chain to be upended by events and dynamics out of our control. Imagine that you go into a clothing store, you head for the t-shirt section, and you have two options. T-shirt 1 was made with child slave labor, and T-shirt 2 was not made with child slave labor. Which would you choose? I'm hoping, you choose the one not made with child slave labor. So why do all of us completely disregard the immense pain, suffering, and environmental destruction in cobalt mining? Everyone who uses a smartphone, laptop, drives an electric vehicle, or any other device with a rechargeable battery is contributing to the exploitation and forced labor of thousands of women and children. As Siddharth Kara points out in his groundbreaking study, Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives, cobalt is the key mineral that enables portable batteries to have long lives without overheating. Nearly 75% of cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The mining there is done in horribly unsafe conditions. Cobalt is highly toxic to breathe in or touch, and yet thousands, including women with babies, mine it without proper tools, protection, compensation, or basic human rights. In many cases, armed soldiers force the labor. Essentially, the multi-trillion-dollar tech market and the rapidly exploding electric vehicle market, both extraordinarily profitable enterprises, extract profits on the backs of the poorest citizens. While there are many sustainable mining initiatives, and you might be thinking, not my favorite tech company, the reality is that at the bottom of the supply chain, ethically mined cobalt is mixed with blood-soaked cobalt, a problem palm oil production suffers from. When you get on the ground, as Kara did, access is limited and highly dangerous, you will find a problem that defies modern conceptions of human decency. Yet we possess an unending appetite for more and more rechargeable batteries. We're so wedded to our smartphones and laptops to conduct our lives, and EVs are a crucial component of our global decarbonization efforts, it's hard to imagine that demand for cobalt will abate anytime soon. So the question is, now that we know, do we continue the never-ending quest for portable technological sophistication at the expense of society's most vulnerable, causing untold suffering? This is where unbridled demand and deep supply chain visibility may present some limits to our assumptions about capitalism. It will be changing consumer habits that will first bring about changes to demand. Undoubtedly, regulations will follow thereafter. So as we design the next generation supply chain, we need to be aware of those consuming at the top and those laboring at the bottom. We should also ask ourselves, how much technology do we really need? Peak digital. When is there too much digital? I know this is ironic for a digital futurist to ask, especially when I started this book by discussing the problems of a paper-based vaccine record. But it's a question we must continually consider. Alarms are being raised about the digital security of today's automobiles. Web researcher Sam Curry states, quote, nearly every automobile manufactured in the last 5 years had nearly identical functionality. If an attacker were able to find vulnerabilities in the API endpoints that vehicle telematics systems use, they could honk the horn, flash lights, remotely track, lock, unlock, start, stop vehicles completely remotely, unquote. So he and his friends decided to test out their theory. The results were staggering and scary. They identified vulnerabilities in Kia, Honda, Infiniti, Nissan, Acura, Hyundai, and Genesis cars, allowing them to fully remote lock, unlock, engine start, engine stop, precision locate, flash headlights, and honk vehicles using only the victim's email address. Due to a misconfigured single sign-on, this group could create their own accounts on Mercedes-Benz internal systems, giving them full documentation and source code to the Mercedes app. Shockingly, once they had legitimate credentials and access to the internal Slack system, they could have easily elevated their privileges, as happened in the Twitter hack. Fortunately, these hackers submitted their findings to Mercedes-Benz admins, but the response they received was less than reassuring. This is likely because, and I'm guessing here, the the Mercedes-Benz admins weren't used to dealing with third parties submitting security issues. Interestingly, I had a similar experience with American Express years ago when I came across a website error that exposed some confidential security information. I tried to report it to their admins, who didn't understand and thus dismissed it. A perfect example of humans' greatest deficiency, the ego. If we look more closely at these automotive digital security lapses, many originate at the weakest point between the manufacturer and the dealers, third parties. My hypothesis is that the security weakness creeps in where the manufacturer has to connect and integrate with thousands of dealers, many of whom may not be as digitally savvy as they need to be. However, since there's a greater focus on the customer experience of car performance, securing communication with the dealers probably takes a back seat. Again, the third party is the weak link. The right to repair. In March of 2020, Vice News produced a video entitled "Farmers Are Hacking Their Tractors Because of a Repair Ban," which featured the lengths farmers were going to so that they could fix their tractors. This included downloading hacked versions of John Deere software from Eastern Europe. In what was becoming an altogether refrain from the digital age, people, businesses, and even the military buy expensive, complicated equipment that runs proprietary software. But when the equipment stops working, even for minor issues, only a dealer is authorized to repair it. Loading up a massive tractor and having it hauled hundreds of miles simply to have a John Deere service technician connect a computer and update some software or clear a fault seems ridiculous, not to mention costly. Even worse, what happens when the manufacturer stops supporting a particular module or feature? This forces the customer to upgrade or not use the feature, which can be problematic. Vice News video basically asked, why is it that a farmer, or any of us really, can't have access to the underlying software to fix problems, especially considering how these disruptions can have a deleterious effect on farmers' ability to effectively do their job and feed the nation and world. Farmers were able to do this in the pre-digital age, so why not now? To punctuate this point, the Vice News video ends by showing a farmer's old tractor juxtaposed against the brand new digitally enabled tractor. He points out that the old tractor still works after 100 years and muses whether this new tractor will still be working in 100 years. As of January 9, 2023, John Deere changed its policy and granted U.S. farmers the right to repair their equipment without using proprietary parts and service facilities. In exchange, representatives for the farmers have agreed not to push for state or federal right to repair regulations. This acquiescence by John Deere shows just how much weight the farmers' voices carried in this fight. When the food supply is threatened, people, especially politicians, take notice. But the right to repair movement is just starting. If you're a fan of McDonald's, you're probably painfully aware that on any given visit, there's a decent chance the ice cream machine is broken. The problem is so pervasive that it has become a meme, a popular TikTok, and was a joke on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. 24-year-old Rashik Zahid built McBroken.com to track which locations have an out-of-order machine, using a bot to place an order for ice cream at every McDonald's every 30 minutes. According to Wired, anywhere from 5 to 16% of ice cream machines are broken at any given time. As I write, I checked McBroken right now, and 12% of Bay Area ice cream machines are down, while 27% in San Diego and 27% in New York are currently out of order. The issue has become so bad that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission has investigated. How could such a successful business continually fail to deliver for its customers, readily lose revenue, and open itself for a public thrashing by its competitors? The answer lies at the intersection of right to repair, third-party management, and hacking. Taylor, a company specializing in commercial soft-serve, frozen beverage, and commercial griddles, supplies digital ice cream machines to tens of thousands of McDonald's restaurants globally. Of course, Taylor has deemed the equipment and software of the machine as proprietary, allowing only approved distributors to service the equipment. Thus, if you have a poorly performing machine, frequently out of service, and no matter how simple the solution to fix the problem, you have to wait hours or days for a Taylor-authorized technician to come out. Much like the John Deere situation, McDonald's franchisees are unable to sell a popular item and lose money accordingly due to an inability to contract or do their own maintenance. It's even worse when the issue might be as simple as when the machine was cleaned, which happens every night, something may not have been put back together properly. Franchisee owners need to wait days and pay hundreds of dollars for a tailor technician to tell them that was the issue. Innovators and entrepreneurs Jeremy O'Sullivan and Melissa Nelson realized that you can, quote, press the cone icon on the screen of the Taylor C602 digital ice cream machine, then tap the buttons that show a snowflake and a milkshake to set the digits on the screen to 5, then 2, then 3, then 1. After that precise series of no fewer than 16 button presses, a menu magically unlocks. With this cheat code, you can access the machine's vital signs, unquote. Realizing the utility of making the machine's internal operations easily accessible, they created a gadget and company called Kitch. The device sits within the machine and monitors all the internal workings and presents any error messages along with suggested fixes. A very clever and useful hack. Going back to the use case described above, if a franchisee owner or manager can see that a machine didn't finish its sanitize cycle because it wasn't reassembled properly after cleaning, then they can solve the issue before business opens. It eliminates the need for a service repair call. After initially being supportive of the idea, eventually Taylor, and by extension McDonald's, allegedly reverse-engineered the Kitch device, created their own device, and then forbade franchisees from using Kitch or any other third party. Eventually, Kitch went out of business, and now there is ongoing litigation. The Kitch story is both a useful and cautionary tale. If we think about it from an intelligence tools people point of view, there are some useful correlations. First, what franchisees lacked was intelligence about the inner workings and potential problems of their ice cream machines. It was pretty easy for O'Sullivan and Nelson to build a tool to create the intelligence. Giving the intelligence to the franchisee owners/managers became a huge operational lift. It should have been a win for all parties: Kitch, franchisee owners, employees, McDonald's, and Taylor. Is this not what innovation is all about? Taylor and McDonald's heavy-handed response demonstrated that they viewed the problem in analog terms. Like John Deere did initially, they treated their machine as a black box only openable by them. But in the digital age, nothing is a closed box. When farmers acquire John Deere software from Eastern Europe, it begs all kinds of questions and concerns, not the least of which is the provenance of the software. Does this contain malware that could be propagated to other network tractors and executed later on down the line, bringing all tractors in the U.S. to a halt? It could be a ransomware attack at best, or turn the tractor into a weapon of destruction at worst. What's worse for Taylor is that Kitch demonstrated the machine's poor digital security. What John Deere and Taylor should have done is provided a software developer kit and a community around repairing the machines, which meant they could control and have visibility in how people were using and solving problems, and then fix said problems. Instead, they took an analog approach, that of putting profits over any other broader concerns. Moreover, these decisions must have been made by people who didn't understand the implications of building and maintaining digital devices, especially in non-technology industries. Again, this brings to the fore, where do intellectual property rights start and stop? The risk that keeps me up at night. Perhaps the greatest threat to our supply chains will be the humans who run them. Every corporation suffers from human fallibility. This is just an observation, not a criticism. Turf wars over ownership, reporting structure, and political capital are just many of the day-to-day issues that plague large enterprises. This on top of highly matrixed and complicated op models and governance structures that not only stifle innovation, but also day-to-day operations. Sometimes there's simply a culture of mistrust among different functions, business units, or even between executives. Then there are the middle managers who act as the bridge between leaders and rank-and-file employees. It is the middle managers who continually sandbag digital transformations. Case in point, I have a client who's struggling with the rollout of a subpar contract management system and process. The middle manager tasked with the project is content to keep rolling it out indefinitely. There's little motivation to do more than conduct meetings and talk about deployment. And when they do deploy, it is a soft deployment, where the tool is made available and the quote-unquote training is done, but adoption is left to the individual user's preference. Not so shockingly, the result is a continuation of the status quo. The middle manager knows full well that meeting their annual performance objectives is tied to the activity of the rollout and not successful adoption. When pushed, this middle manager went on a long rant about the dangers of deploying an untested technology and assured everyone that there was nothing to worry about. This reflexive defensiveness to such a monumental pain point is a clear example of how middle managers do as little as possible while hiding behind any plausible excuse for inaction. Interestingly, after that meeting, a junior person on the team reached out to me on LinkedIn and was very engaged and excited about the future. Finally, there is need for greater digital literacy within any enterprise's leadership team. This means that there is a collective knowledge and empowerment versus simply deferring all things technology to the CIO. The incomparable Steve Jobs, speaking to the Santa Clara Valley Historical Association in 1994, stated, quote, "The minute you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing. It's to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it," unquote. Jobs was encouraging people to live their best lives by not accepting the constraints of what is, but instead to imagine and create what could be. By poking, prodding, changing, life can be improved. He was urging people to refuse to accept things as they are by opening them up, taking them apart, and putting them back together in a different way. In short, he was suggesting for individuals to hack society's expectations and chart their own course. This is no different than what we as supply chain professionals need to do. In the digital and information age, innovations and breakthroughs happen at a lightning pace. Today's best practice is tomorrow's blunder. Today's supplier is tomorrow's competitor. Today's competitor is tomorrow's partner. The better we get at managing our relationships and using the associated data exchange and corresponding digital capabilities, the better chance we will have at successfully securing and building resilient supply chains. My challenge to today's supply chain leaders: will you be a steward of the enterprise? Will you make the tough choices and go against the CIO if necessary? Will you inspire folks to build something better? Will you measure progress without change? Activity instead of productivity? How do you want your tenure to be evaluated by future generations? Were you the one who bought the big ERP system that cost $1 billion, took a decade to implement, and was out of date the day you signed the contract? Sure, you did your job, and nobody will hold you accountable when it fails to meet the promises or expectations. But is this the legacy you want to leave? Even if CEOs and board members don't understand the importance of what we do, the world is watching, and future business leaders will judge the choices we make today. We are at a once-in-a-generation moment as supply chain professionals. Will we embrace it? If not us, then who? And if not now, when? My sincere hope is that by the time the next global health crisis comes around, we will be able to get the proper medical resources, vaccines, medical device, whatever, to everyone who needs it. I, for one, am tired of putting products into my body where I can't see where it was manufactured, how it was handled, and what route it took to get to me. My expectation is that collectively we will start to receive provenance and track and trace data for everything we consume, whether it's a bag of pretzels or a tablet computer. As supply chain practitioners and leaders, this is the promise we must make to society. And nobody had better ask me to store crucial information on a piece of paper ever again.